All right, so with all that being said, let's tackle our first question. This will be number 4 on your sheet. And first, it's going to be a little harder to do these questions just because they look different than what we've done before, because it's all in College Board format. But notice that it's the same stuff we do in class, like A, B, and C sections to each question. And this looks really intimidating in my opinion because it's just question after question. But don't let that stop you from even starting. Okay, if you start reading the questions, you're going to see, oh, we actually learned like all of this. It was a long time ago, but we did learn it. So I actually printed out the questions I'm going to do, but just like you, I'm going to work on them on a separate sheet of paper. And on that separate sheet of paper, that's how you're going to do the AP exam as well. You're going to do work on a separate sheet of paper and then take a picture. So we're actually in a really good place. It's very similar to what we did even before. So with all of these, the format is always going to be there's going to be a few warm-up questions. And if you don't understand how to do the warm-up questions, it's no big deal because the lesson is usually going to cover the same topics. But those questions are what I consider the easiest questions that you could have. So I kind of give them to you before to get your blood flowing. Then during the lesson, the questions I do during the lesson are going to go from kind of easy-ish to medium-ish to always a very hard question at the end. Okay, so the lesson will kind of cover all possible things. It'll cover easy questions, cover hard questions. And then after the lesson, which is usually going to be like 3 of these free responses, I'm going to give you post-lesson questions that are going to be medium. Okay, so they start out easy, we work to the hard ones in lesson, and then I'll give you some medium to hard ones at the end. As I've said before, you only need to do 3 questions. The rest is going to be optional. So yeah. Okay, let's get into the question. I'll read it because it's pretty short. And just because I'm not writing the questions now, you're going to notice it's kind of very similar to the stuff we've always done. So it first says, the sizes in square feet of the 20 rooms in a residential hall at a university are summarized in the following histogram. So basically this is how big the rooms are in a dorm. Okay, and we can look at this and we can already say it's bimodal. We could know how to find the median, and all of that's going to be part of A. Because A says, based on the histogram, write a few sentences describing the distribution of room size in the residential hall. So this doesn't feel like that long ago to me, but it's crazy. This was like 9 months ago. But remember that anytime it asks you to describe a distribution, and this is just a set of data, right? Each of these is a data point. That means that there's 3 rooms that are in between 100 and 150. So this is a data set. And the 3 words that we try to describe about the distribution are the center, shape, and spread. Okay? So we talked about that so much in the beginning, and it's so fundamental to the class. We go on to talk about the standard deviation and mean the entire year, but that all started with talking about and describing distributions, center, shape, and spread. So when you're writing a question like this, it says write a few sentences. You don't even need to write a paragraph. You can write the 3 words and then write a sentence or 2 on each of them. Okay, this isn't like an English class. You don't have to write essays here. You don't have to even be a good writer. Just say what you need to say as clear as possible. Okay, so first, the center. We know that center is the mean or the median. And if I wanted to find that with a histogram, and we're going to talk about this also in the next question, we have to remember, how can you find the median of a histogram? And the way that we do that is we figure out how many data points there are, divide it by 2, or 1 plus that. So remember that, let's think here that there's 20 rooms. The median of those 20 rooms is going to be in between the 10th and the 11th room. Okay, so remember that formula, n plus 1 divided by 2, where n equals sample size. So we were talking about sample size way back. Maybe you guys remember this, but if we wanted to figure out the middle of a sample of 20, it's just going to be 21 divided by 2, or 10.5. That 10.5 indicates that in between the 10th and the 11th person is the median. So if this is my histogram, let's just count. 1, 2, 3. This gets us up to 9. The 10th person is here, and that means the 11th person is in between 250 and 300. So that's like not good for us, because what that means is that it really could be anywhere in between 200 and 300, because we know that the 10th person is here and the 11th person is here. Okay, so 10.5 could really be anywhere in this. So if we want to talk about the center of the distribution and it's a histogram, we can't find the mean because this is a situation where we don't actually know the data points. We just know like what interval they're in, but we can find an estimate for the median. So we can say that the median is in between 200 and 300. And that's a short sentence, but that's okay. There's going to be more to talk about with the shape and the spread of this. And if you even look, it's going to tell us what these values are down here. So next it says the shape, and there are lots of different shapes. I'm going to, give you some reference sheets for the AP, but, it could be symmetrical, it could be skewed. Those are the big things. But here, there's two humps. And if there's a bunch of humps like going up and down, it's going to be modal, and bimodal would mean there's two humps. So we'll say that the shape is bimodal. And then finally the spread. Okay, so spread is either the standard deviation or like in the variance, or the range. Okay, so center is mean or median, shape is with words, and spread is either that like standard deviation variance type or the range. And you can't find the standard deviation here, but we can estimate what the range is going to be. But that can be kind of difficult because we don't know where the data points are. So again, the biggest the range could possibly be is if there's a data point at 350 and a data point at 100. Then the range would be 250. But let's say instead that all three of these data points are actually at 149.99999 or 150, and all three of these data points are at 300. If that's the case, the range could be as small as 150. Okay, so if you're kind of getting confused with that logic, work through a lot of these questions. But the range could be as big as this, but it could be as small as this. Now, what this question is basically getting at is what you can solve with a histogram versus what you can solve with actual statistics. Okay, so when we did this, this is only part A of a bigger question. This is our few sentences. We talked about the center, shape, and spread. The center and the shape, we weren't very clear because the histogram doesn't really tell us that much information. Okay, it doesn't give us the data points. So that's where B comes into play. And B says summary statistics are given in the table below. And these are like the important statistics, the mean and the standard deviation, and then the 5 numbers summary, which is the box plot, right? So before it asks us to make a box plot on the next page, it says determine whether there are potential outliers in the data. Then use the following grid to sketch a box plot. So if I didn't say this before, one thing that's really useful about this open note test is you don't even need to memorize stuff like the outlier formula. As long as you're taking all of these notes, you can come back to them on the test. Okay? So an outlier, remember that when we're trying to find an outlier, we find a range of numbers based on Q1 and Q3 that we consider to be the normal range. And if it's not in that range of numbers, then it's considered an outlier. So an outlier would be any number farther. You don't need to write this on the AP exam, so let me not write it either. We'll call it the normal range is going to be, and this is the formula, right? We take Q3 minus Q1 and multiply that to 1.5. Then we add that to Q3 and subtract that to Q1. So it's going to be Q1 minus 1.5, the IQR. Remember IQR. And then Q3 plus 1.5 IQR. So the inner quartile range here is something like 80. And we multiply that to 1.5. And that's going to give us a number that we add and subtract. And because the range of numbers that are outliers is always farther than Q1 and Q3, remember that this is the 25th percentile. This is the 75th percentile. So yeah, let's solve this. We can first say IQR is 292 minus 174, so 118, times 1.5, 177. So that number, we're going to take Q1 minus 177 and Q3 plus 177. So it's going to end up being negative for the first one. So that's -3. We don't need a calculator. And 469. Okay, so that's the range of numbers that are considered not outliers. So it says determine whether there are potential outliers in the data. And if this is our range, how can we know whether or not they're outliers? And the way we look at that is by looking at the minimum and the maximum. This tells us that no data point is under 134. So therefore, there's no outlier on the lower side because nothing is less than -3. And on the other side, no number is greater than 469. So therefore, there's no outliers. So we can say because the min is greater than -3 and max is less than 469, there are no outliers. And there are a few other outlier questions, so that would be good practice. I mean, that's a possible thing they could ask you, but that is how we could find the potential outliers. And then the next thing it asks us to do is make a box plot. So yeah, you can already tell these videos are going to be really long because I'm going to go over a bunch of questions. But we want to make this box plot using the 5-number summary. For a box plot, it's going to be that weird box thing with 2 lines on the end. Sometimes it's called a box and whisker plot because they're considered the whiskers. But all it is the 5-number summary, where it starts with the minimum. So our minimum here was 134. Which is going to be like right there. So that's the start of it. We can put the other dot for the maximum at 315. And then 174 to 292. So yeah, all I'm doing is plotting. Hopefully this is easy to everyone. But that's the start and end of my box. And then the inside, there's another line, and that line is going to be wherever the median is. So 253.5. Okay, so it's really ugly, but like in math, it doesn't matter if your graph is ugly, it just has to be correct. But just remember, if you're doing a box plot or you have to make a box plot, it's just a 5-number summary. The min, Q1, Q3, the median, and the max. And it splits your data into quartiles. So 25% of the data is here, 25% is here, etc., etc. So let's finish this up with part C. Okay, so we're going to tackle number 3 now, or is part C. And I think part C is pretty interesting. And we're going to talk about kind of the last really important part of shape, and that's symmetry versus skewness. And it says, what characteristic of the shape of the distribution of room size is apparent from the histogram, but not from the box plot? So we're looking at two graphical displays, and kind of a big theme of the beginning of the year is that different graphical displays tell you different things. And they can actually kind of, to some degree, disagree on stuff like the shape, just because they highlight different parts of the shape. So what we're looking at here is that the histogram appears bimodal, and if you were to rate its symmetry versus skewness, the histogram kind of seems like it's pretty symmetrical, okay? The right side looks like it's one bigger, but other than that, it's symmetrical. But if we look at the histogram makes it really seem like the graph is skewed. And that's because we know that wide bars indicate a spread of data, and small bars indicate data that's really close together. And here, the right side of my graph is much more condensed than the left side of my graph, okay? So what that means is that a lot of these data points are probably closer to 300 in this big bar. And on the left side, it's probably a little bit more spread out. Okay, so we can kind of see that better from the box plot. And even if you didn't know that, and even to me, it's a little bit confusing. How are we getting different shapes from both of these? The answer is still clear. If you have a box plot, the smaller side is going to be the side that has most of the data. So that means we're skewed the other direction. Think we're skewed left because these data points are spread. And you can have a shape like bimodal and also be skewed one direction, okay? Because skewness pretty much just means the mean is going to go in that direction, because that side of the data set has less or more. Okay, so sometimes you can have this shape, but still say, well, because it's skewed left, the mean is going to be closer to this side, okay? So those are the thoughts. Let me just write it out. I'm just going to say the box plot shows skewness. Okay, so the sentence I wrote is the box plot shows that the distribution is skewed left because data is more clumped together on the right side. So I think that that's a really cool question, and that's a really comprehensive question, honestly. I'm only going to go over 3 questions into this unit, but you already have a lot of the skills just from this question, okay? Knowing how to make a box plot, knowing how to interpret it, knowing how to find the median of a histogram, and all the stuff related to a histogram. And of the 3 displays, these are the big 2. Stem plots are kind of actually they're really useful, but they're not as common. So that is the second review question. And I've pretty much made up my mind on how I'm going to do this for the next week or 2. The pressure was getting at me to do really well with everything, and this situation is really difficult. This is really isolating. And I kind of just shut down, and burned out. It was a situation similar to the school year. So I'm going to separate basically the skits and the lessons from now on. I'm going to keep Algebra 2 really slow because I have that luxury, and that's kind of going to continue on the narrative. But for the next week or so, I'm just going to really just give out a bunch of review questions. And we still have 10 days. I mean, I've never studied for a test more than 3 days in advance. So, and I passed on my APs, so you guys should be good if you're dedicated.